At my son's wedding, the one I paid $150,000 for, my new daughter-in-law looked me straight in the eye and said to her friends, "That's the help we had to invite." Everyone within earshot turned to stare. Some laughed. Most looked away, embarrassed for me. I'm Cynthia Brennan. I'm 63 years old. I stood there by the dessert table in my carefully chosen burgundy dress, and I did something that surprised even myself. I smiled, said nothing, and calmly set down my champagne glass. Then I decided to do something about it. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. The morning of September 15th, 2024, I woke at 5:30 to sunlight streaming through the windows of my Beacon Hill townhouse. The house was silent in that particular way that only comes in the hours before a city wakes up, when even Boston seems to be holding its breath. Today, my only child was getting married. I lay there for a moment staring at the ceiling, thinking about James as a little boy. How he used to climb into bed with Robert and me on Saturday mornings, his small body warm and trusting between us. How Robert would make pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse while James giggled at the kitchen table. Robert had been gone for 18 years now. Cancer took him when he was just 45 years old, when James was only 13. Sometimes I still reached for him in the morning, forgetting for just a second that the other side of the bed would be cold. But today wasn't a day for grief. Today was supposed to be about joy. I got up and walked to my closet, where the burgundy dress hung exactly where I'd placed it 3 weeks ago. I'd tried on 27 dresses before settling on this one. It had taken me to 4 different stores across Boston, Neiman Marcus, Saks, 2 boutiques in Back Bay. The sales associates had been helpful, patient even, though I'd caught one woman's expression when I mentioned it was for my son's wedding to a Sterling. "Oh," she'd said, her smile becoming somehow sharper. "The Sterlings, old Boston family, Louisburg Square, isn't it?" "I believe so," I'd replied, trying not to show how that comment had stung. The dress was elegant but not ostentatious, dignified without demanding attention, the dress of a mother who wanted to belong without being noticed. I see now what I was doing, trying to make myself smaller, less threatening, less visible. I'm a black woman. My parents came from Ethiopia when I was 6 months old. I grew up in Dorchester, worked my way through Northeastern, married Robert when I was 25. I built a successful business over 18 years. But standing in that boutique, holding that burgundy dress, I was still trying to prove I deserved to be in the room. The wedding was at Trinity Church in Copley Square, the same church where Robert and I had married 38 years ago. I arrived at 9:30 for an 11 o'clock ceremony. The September morning was that perfect kind of crisp and bright that makes you believe in new beginnings. The Sterlings were already there when I pulled up in my 10-year-old Mercedes. I could hear them before I saw them. Loud, confident voices filling the space around the church entrance. Richard Sterling stood on the steps in an immaculate charcoal suit, holding court like a man who'd never questioned his place in the world. His wife Patricia stood beside him in cream silk, her blonde hair perfect, her smile practiced. Around them clustered what looked like half of Beacon Hill society, everyone dressed in coordinated shades of ivory and champagne, like they'd all received the same memo about the color palette. I got out of my car and smoothed down my burgundy dress. Suddenly it felt too dark, too bold, too much like I was trying too hard, but I held my head high and walked toward the church entrance. "Mrs. Brennan," Patricia Sterling's voice cut through the morning air. She approached with her hand extended, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "So lovely to finally meet you properly. James has told us so much." Her handshake was brief, cool, professional. "Mrs. Sterling," I replied warmly, "thank you for welcoming me into your family." "Of course." Her eyes flicked over my dress, my shoes, my hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Your English is wonderful. How long have you been in the States?" I felt the familiar tightness in my chest. "I was born here, actually, in Boston." "Oh," she laughed, that tinkling society laugh. "I'm so sorry. I just assumed, well, you know how it is." I did know. I knew exactly how it was. Richard Sterling approached then, extending his hand with the easy confidence of a man who'd spent his entire life being deferred to. "Cynthia. May I call you Cynthia? Richard Sterling. We're so pleased to have James joining our family." Joining their family, as if I were handing over my son like property. "The pleasure is mine," I said. We made small talk for a few more minutes. The weather, the church, the reception venue. Richard mentioned that the Sterlings had been married at Trinity Church for 3 generations. Patricia mentioned that their daughter Madison had always dreamed of a September wedding. Neither of them asked me a single question about myself. Then the church bells began to ring, and we all filed inside. I took my seat in the front row on the groom's side. Mother of the groom. That seat was mine, no matter what anyone else thought. The church filled around me. I watched the Sterlings' friends arrive. Old money, old families, old grudges probably. Women in designer suits with pearls that cost more than my car. Men in custom-tailored everything. They nodded politely at me as they passed, their eyes curious but distant. When the processional music began, when James appeared at the altar with his best man, my breath caught. He looked so much like his father. Same height, 6'2", same broad shoulders, same way of standing with his weight slightly on his left foot. He was wearing Robert's cufflinks. I'd given them to him that morning at his apartment. "Dad would be so proud of you," I'd whispered, straightening his bow tie. "Thanks for everything, Mom," he'd said. But his eyes had drifted away from mine, unable to quite hold my gaze. At the time, I'd told myself it was just nerves. Now, watching him at the altar, I felt such hope, such certainty that this was right, that all the sacrifice, all the hard work, all the lonely nights building the business Robert had left me, all of it had been worth it. My son was beginning the kind of life his father and I had dreamed for him. The processional began. Madison Sterling appeared at the back of the church in her $15,000 Vera Wang gown, and I'll be honest, she was breathtaking. Genuinely, undeniably beautiful. Blonde hair swept up in an elegant chignon, makeup perfect, figure like a fashion model. I understood why James loved her, why he'd wanted so badly to give her this day. They exchanged vows. Traditional ones, the same ones Robert and I had spoken. For better or for worse. For richer or for poorer. In sickness and in health. I cried into the handkerchief I'd brought for exactly this purpose. Happy tears, I thought. Tears of joy for my son's new life. When they kissed, the church erupted in applause. When they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, I stood with everyone else and clapped until my hands hurt. I thought this was a beginning. I had no idea it was an ending. The reception was at the Boston Public Library's Bates Hall, all soaring ceilings and marble columns and chandeliers that had witnessed a century of Boston's finest moments. I'd written the check for the venue 6 months ago, $47,000 just for the space rental. The caterer was another $63,000. The flowers, white roses and peonies arranged with mathematical precision, had cost $22,000. I knew these numbers because I'd paid them all. When James had first called me about the wedding budget, his voice had been tight with stress. "Mom, the venues Madison is looking at start around $85,000, just for the basics." I'd been sitting in my office at Brennan Property Group, reviewing quarterly reports. $85,000? James, I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, you don't understand. Madison's family has certain expectations. Her sister Emma's wedding was at the Four Seasons. What about the Sterlings contributing? Traditionally, the bride's family handles most of the wedding expenses. There had been a pause. I was getting used to those pauses lately. "Mr. Sterling said they'd contribute what they can," James had said carefully. "But their capital is tied up temporarily. Cash flow issues." I'd known right then that something was off. Truly wealthy families don't have liquidity problems when it comes to their daughter's wedding. But I didn't say that. "Darling, if they're going through financial difficulties, maybe a smaller—" "Mom, no!" His voice had been sharp. "I can't ask them to scale back. I need to show them I can take care of their daughter." That desperation in his voice, that need to prove something. "How much total?" I'd asked. "With everything. Catering, flowers, photography, the dress, the band, invitations, around $150,000. Maybe a bit more." The room had felt suddenly too quiet. "James, I know, but Mom, I love her. This is important to her family. I can't lose her because I couldn't give her the wedding she deserves." I should have said no. Should have explained that a marriage built on financial pressure was already cracking. Should have asked why a woman who truly loved him would need him to prove it this way. But I'd looked at Robert's photograph on my desk, that smile I'd loved for so many years, And I'd thought about what he would have done. Robert, who'd never been able to say no to James. "Let me think about it," I'd said. That night, I'd sat alone with a glass of wine and a calculator. 150,000 was significant. It would delay some of my retirement plans, eat into my emergency fund. But I could manage it. I'd called James the next morning. "I'll take care of it." His relief had been audible. "Thank you, Mom. You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you." Over the next months, as Madison's plans expanded, upgraded flowers, better band, more elaborate favors, the number climbed. 85 became 100, became 130, became 150,000, $347. I said yes every time. I didn't know that every dollar I spent was buying me a seat at table 12 in the back corner near the kitchen doors. I didn't know that my generosity would be repaid with the word help. The seating chart was displayed on an ornate easel near the entrance to Bates Hall. I found my name quickly because I'd been looking for it with hope, thinking maybe I'd be seated with James's college friends, or perhaps at a table with some of the Sterling's extended family. Table 12, back right corner, positioned behind a marble column that partially blocked the view of the head table. I was seated alone. Around me, the other tables filled up. Tables 1 through 4 were clearly Sterling territory. Richard and Patricia holding court, Madison's extended family, Boston society types in their pearls and power suits. Tables 5 through 7 seemed to be James's friends from college and business school. Table 8 was Madison's younger sister Emma and her friends. Table 12 was me, and 2 empty chairs that apparently no one wanted to fill. The centerpiece in front of me was stunning. White roses and peonies with trailing ivy, probably worth more than most people's monthly rent. I'd paid for it, along with the 49 other identical arrangements throughout the hall. From my seat, I watched my son dance with his new wife under those crystal chandeliers. A marble column blocked my direct view of the head table, but I could catch glimpses. James's profile when he turned to kiss Madison, her laugh carrying across the room like crystal breaking. The Sterlings toasted and congratulated themselves on a wedding well done. Richard gave a speech about welcoming James into our family. No mention of me or what I'd contributed. Patricia dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Madison's friends clustered around her like beautiful predatory birds. I noticed Emma Sterling before she noticed me. She was standing near her family's tables with a champagne flute in her hand, but her eyes kept drifting in my direction. 3 times I caught her looking. Each time her expression held something I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not amusement. Something closer to conflict. I was working up the courage to perhaps walk over to James's table when I heard Madison's voice. She was about 15 feet away at the dessert table, surrounded by a group of her friends, all of them holding champagne flutes like they were born with crystal in their hands. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her voice carried across the marble floors. "I'm telling you, she's exhausting," Madison said. "James's mother. She's been hovering since the engagement, calling every week, offering opinions nobody asked for." One of her friends laughed. "Oh God, the clingy mother-in-law type." "Exactly," Madison continued, her voice getting louder. She was on her 3rd or 4th glass of champagne, I could tell by the way she was gesturing. "And she's so, I don't know how to say this nicely, middle class about everything. Like she doesn't understand how things work in families like ours." My hands went cold around my own champagne glass. Middle class, the wedding she thought was fancy, the wedding I'd paid $150,347 for. Every flower in her hand, every bite of caviar on those elegant plates, all paid for by the woman she was mocking. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part came next, when Madison gestured in my direction with her champagne flute, that perfectly manicured hand pointing at me like I was something on display. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to her circle, her voice carrying even further, "I'd like you to meet the help we had to invite." The laughter that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was genuine, delighted, like she'd said something clever instead of cruel. Heads turned, following her gesture. I watched it happen. 50, maybe 60 people turning to look at me, the woman sitting alone at table 12 in her burgundy dress. Some laughed. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed. A few whispered to each other behind their hands. I looked for James. Found him near the head table, still in his tuxedo. He'd heard. I could tell by the way his shoulders tensed, by the way he suddenly found the floor incredibly interesting. My son, the boy I'd raised alone, whose education I'd funded, whose wedding I'd just paid for. He heard his new wife call me the help, and he looked at the floor. Near the bar, I caught a glimpse of Emma, Madison's younger sister. She was 26 with her sister's blonde hair, but none of her cruelty. Our eyes met for just a second, and I saw something in her face that looked like shame. That's when I felt it. Not my heart breaking. That would come later. This was something different, something harder and colder. It was the wall I'd put up between who I really was and who I'd been pretending to be for my son's sake. The wall between Cynthia Brennan, successful CEO of Brennan Property Group, and Cynthia Brennan, grateful mother of the groom sitting quietly at table 12. And in that moment, watching them laugh, watching my son stare at his shoes, I realized something that would change everything. They had no idea who I really was. But they were about to find out. I watched Richard Sterling's face change. It started with his eyes, confusion first, then recognition, then something that looked remarkably like fear. He'd just joined the little circle of laughter, champagne glass in hand, that easy smile wealthy men wear when they're comfortable in their world. He'd probably heard the tail end of his daughter's joke, seen the pointing, joined in the amusement without really paying attention to who was on the receiving end. But then he looked, really looked, at me, standing there by the dessert table in my carefully chosen burgundy dress, at the woman his daughter had just called the help in front of 200 guests, and I watched the color drain from his face like someone had pulled a plug. "Wait," he said slowly, his voice cutting through the lingering laughter. The smile was gone now. "Aren't you—" He stopped, squinting at me across the 15 feet of marble floor between us. "Aren't you Cynthia Brennan?" The group went silent. That kind of silence that feels different from the one before, heavier, confused, waiting. Richard's hand started to shake slightly, champagne rippling in his glass. Madison turned to her father, her perfect smile finally cracking. "Dad, what are you talking about? That's just Daniel's mother. Her name is Coleman." "Brennan was my maiden name," I said calmly, my voice steady in a way I didn't quite feel. "I went back to it for business purposes after my husband passed. It avoids confusion." Richard wasn't looking at his daughter anymore. He was staring at me with the kind of expression I'd seen before on people who just realized they'd made a terrible, irreversible mistake. The kind of expression that comes when you understand you've been playing poker with someone who's been holding all the cards while you thought you were winning. He swallowed hard, and I could see his throat working. "You're my new majority shareholder." The words hung in the air between us like a bomb that hadn't quite exploded yet. Around us, the reception continued. Music playing, people dancing, servers carrying trays. But in our little corner, everything had stopped. Patricia Sterling materialized at her husband's elbow, her smile frozen in place like a mask that no longer fit. "Richard, what's happening?" Madison was looking between us now, her champagne glass forgotten in her hand. I could see her mind working, trying to connect the dots, trying to understand why her father looked like he'd just seen a ghost. "Mrs. Coleman," Richard started, then stopped. "Mrs. Brennan, I had no idea. Madison never mentioned—" "Why would she?" I said, setting down my dessert plate with careful precision. "We've barely spoken, and I keep my business life quite separate from my personal life. I'm sure you understand." I let that sink in for a moment, watching understanding dawn on Madison's face, watching her realize that the middle-class woman she'd just humiliated, the clingy mother-in-law she'd called the help, owned 51% of her father's company. That come Monday morning, her father would be sitting across a boardroom table from me, and the balance of power would be very, very different from what it appeared tonight. "It's nice to officially meet you, Richard," I continued. "I believe we have a meeting scheduled for Monday morning, 9 a.m. sharp, according to my attorney. We have quite a lot to discuss." I didn't wait for a response. I turned, found my small evening bag where I'd left it on table 12, that table in the back corner near the kitchen doors where they'd thought I belonged. I picked it up, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the exit. As I passed, I saw Emma standing near the bar, separated now from her family's group. Our eyes met. She gave me the smallest nod, and I saw something in her face that looked like respect, like she'd been waiting her whole life to see someone stand up to them. I walked out of the Boston Public Library into the September night. The air was cool, almost cold, and I could hear the sounds of the city beyond. Traffic, voices, life continuing as it always did. Behind me, in that beautiful hall with its crystal and silk and $150,347 worth of elegance, I'd left my son and his new wife and her family to figure out what had just happened. I walked away from my son's wedding, the wedding I'd paid for, the wedding where his new wife had called me the help. And I didn't look back. I didn't cry on the drive home that Saturday night. I saved my tears for later, when I was alone with my memories and my rage. When I pulled into my driveway on Mount Vernon Street at 10:47 p.m., my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. I sat there in the dark garage for a full 5 minutes, staring at nothing, replaying Madison's voice in my head. The help we had to invite, and my son, my James, looking at the floor. I finally got out of the car, kicked off my heels, $300 shoes that had hurt all night but looked elegant, and walked barefoot through my house to Robert's office. Our office. My office now, I suppose, though I'd never changed a single thing in 18 years. His desk was still covered with his notebooks, his coffee-stained plans for expansion. There was even a half-finished cup of coffee on a stack of papers from 2006, preserved like a museum piece because I couldn't bear to throw it away. I poured myself 2 fingers of Maker's Mark, Robert's favorite, the bottle with the red wax seal that I only opened on the hardest days, the day he died, the day James graduated and didn't mention me in his speech, the day I signed the final paperwork making me sole owner of what we'd built together. Tonight qualified. My phone started buzzing at 11:03 p.m. I pulled it out and saw Patricia Sterling's name. Declined. It buzzed again immediately. Richard Sterling. Declined. Then Madison. James. Derek Sterling. Trevor Sterling. I turned it face down on the desk and took another sip of whiskey. But then I saw Lisa Thompson's name flash across the screen. Lisa was my attorney, had been for the past 12 years. Sharp, ruthless when necessary, and one of the few people in Boston who knew exactly how much power I actually had. I answered. "I heard," Lisa said without preamble. "Emma Sterling just called me. She said you need to see me tonight, that it's urgent." "Emma called you? How does she even have your number?" "She got it from the corporate filings. Cynthia, what happened?" I told her. All of it. Madison's words, the laughter, Richard's face when he recognized me. The whole humiliating, clarifying disaster. Lisa was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'm coming over. Don't touch anything in that office until I get there." "What are you talking about?" "The Sterling acquisition. Emma said there are things you need to know before Monday's meeting. Things about your husband. I'm 15 minutes away." She hung up before I could ask what she meant. Lisa arrived at 11:34 p.m. with her investigator, Sarah Chen, and 2 banker's boxes full of files. Sarah was a former FBI forensic accountant who now did private investigation work for high-net-worth clients. If you needed to find hidden money, Sarah was the best in Boston. "Show me everything you have on Sterling Holdings," Lisa said, setting the boxes on Robert's desk. "Every document, every contract, every communication." "It's all in the acquisition files," I said. "But Lisa, what does this have to do with Robert?" "That's what we're going to find out." For the next 3 hours, we went through everything. The acquisition documents showed that I'd purchased my stake in Sterling Holdings through a shell company called Ashford Capital Partners over an 18-month period ending 6 weeks ago. The final shares had transferred on August 1st, 2024. Richard had been notified on August 3rd that I was now the majority shareholder. "Wait," I said, looking at the timeline. "James met Madison in March. That's 5 months after I started buying shares." 4 months before the acquisition was finalized, Lisa added. "When did James tell you he was engaged?" "Early July. He called on July 8th, actually, a Tuesday evening." I remembered because I'd been reviewing quarterly reports when my phone rang. Sarah was typing rapidly on her laptop. "And when did he ask you to pay for the wedding?" 2 weeks later, July 22nd. The 3 of us looked at each other. "That's 3 weeks after Richard found out you owned his company," Lisa said quietly. Sarah turned her laptop around to show us a spreadsheet. "Look at this. Sterling Holdings bank records. I pulled them as part of due diligence before the acquisition. There's a cash withdrawal of $15,000 on March 12th, 2024, labeled consulting fees. Who was the consultant? I asked. Sarah clicked to another tab. James Coleman, your son. The room spun. I gripped the edge of Robert's desk. There are 5 more payments, Sarah continued, her voice gentle. $15,000 per month from March through July. Total, $90,000 paid to your son by Sterling Holdings. I couldn't breathe. Are you telling me Richard Sterling paid my son $90,000? Yes. Before James met Madison? Or after? Sarah checked her records. First payment was March 12th. James's credit card records show the first charge at a restaurant with Madison's name on the reservation was March 15th, 3 days later. Lisa stood up and started pacing. Richard found out you were acquiring his company. He investigated you, found out about James. He paid James to, what? Date Madison? Spy on you? Or both, Sarah said. She pulled up another document. James's employment records. He was fired from Garrison Consulting on February 23rd, 2024. What? My voice came out as a whisper. He was fired? When did he tell you this? He didn't. He's been pretending to go to work every day for 7 months. The betrayal hit me in waves. My son, my only child, taking money from the man who was trying to destroy me, lying about his job, dating, marrying a woman as part of some kind of scheme I didn't even fully understand yet. There's more, Lisa said quietly. She pulled out another folder from the boxes. This is what Emma wanted you to see. Files from 2006. She opened it. Inside were loan documents, correspondence, business agreements, all with Robert's signature. What is this? I asked, though something cold was already forming in my chest. Your husband lent Richard Sterling $500,000 in 2006, Lisa said, to save Sterling Holdings from bankruptcy. I stared at the documents. Loan agreement dated April 14, 2006. Principal amount, $500,000. Repayment terms, 5 years, 6% interest. Signed by both Robert Coleman and Richard Sterling. There were letters, too. From Richard, dated 2006 and early 2007. I'll never forget this, Robert. You saved my family. I swear I'll repay every penny. The first payment will be coming next month. Thank you again for believing in me. Your faith in me means everything. But Robert had died in September 2007. Cancer that moved faster than any of us expected. Did he ever make a payment? I asked. Sarah shook her head. Not a single one. And look at this. She handed me another document. A letter from Sterling's attorney, dated March 2008, 6 months after Robert died. Disputed debt. Coleman Estate versus Sterling Holdings. This letter serves to notify the estate of Robert Coleman that Mr. Richard Sterling disputes the alleged debt of $500,000. Said amount was a personal gift between friends with no expectation of repayment. As there is no collateral and no notarized agreement specifying repayment terms enforceable against the estate, Mr. Sterling considers this matter closed. I read it 3 times. Each time the words felt sharper, more vicious. Richard Sterling had stolen from a widow, from a 13-year-old child who'd just lost his father. He took $500,000 from us, I said, and he just declared it didn't exist. Yes, Lisa confirmed. For 18 years he's been living on my husband's money, building his life on Robert's generosity, and then he watched me write a check for $150,000 for his daughter's wedding. Money he should have had if he'd paid back what he owed. Yes, I looked at Sarah. Can we prove any of this? The loan is documented. The repayment dispute is documented. But statute of limitations ran out years ago. We can't prosecute him for it. But we can use it, Lisa said. Leverage, proof of character, a pattern of behavior. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Boston was quiet, most of Beacon Hill asleep. But somewhere out there, Richard Sterling was probably sitting in his Lewisburg Square mansion, making phone calls, consulting attorneys, trying to figure out how to control this situation. Keep digging, I told them. I want to know everything. Every transaction. Every lie. All of it. There's one more thing, Sarah said hesitantly. About your husband's death. I turned around. What about it? Emma mentioned something in her call to Lisa. She said she overheard her father talking 20 years ago. Something about Robert's doctor. My blood went cold. What did she hear? She was 12. She heard Richard on the phone saying, "The cancer will take care of our Robert problem." The room tilted. I sat down hard in Robert's chair. "No," I whispered. "No, Richard didn't. He couldn't have." "We don't know anything for certain," Lisa said quickly. "But we should look into it. Into Robert's medical records, the doctors he saw, the treatments he received." I thought about those last terrible months. How Robert had been diagnosed with stage 3 pancreatic cancer in March 2007. How the doctors had said with treatment he had a 40% chance of 5-year survival. How Richard Sterling had recommended a specialist, Dr. Harrison, he'd said, the best in Boston. How Robert had died 6 months later. "Pull his medical records," I said. "All of them. I want to know every doctor he saw, every treatment he received, every medication he took." "Cynthia, now, Lisa, I want to know by Monday." Sunday was a blur of phone calls, documents, and discoveries that made me feel like the ground was dissolving beneath my feet. Sarah worked through the night and delivered her medical investigation report at 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon. We met in my dining room, documents spread across the table like accusations. "Dr. Thomas Harrison," Sarah began, "licensed in Massachusetts in 2001, specialized in oncology. He treated your husband starting May 2007. Richard Sterling recommended him," I said. Said he was the best. Dr. Harrison's license was suspended in 2011 for financial irregularities and questionable patient outcomes. It was revoked permanently in 2013. He now lives in Boca Raton and refused my attempts to interview him. Sarah opened Robert's medical file. "Your husband's original oncologist was Dr. Patricia Lee at Mass General. Her notes from March 2007 show a diagnosis of stage 3 pancreatic cancer. She recommended standard chemotherapy protocol with a 40% 5-year survival rate." "That's what she told us," I confirmed. But in May 2007, Robert switched to Dr. Harrison. Harrison's protocol was unusual. Sarah pulled out treatment records. "He prescribed an experimental drug cocktail. One of the drugs, azathioprine, is actually contraindicated for pancreatic cancer. It can accelerate tumor growth." I felt like I'd been punched. "What?" "The dosages were also significantly higher than recommended. A medical expert I consulted said the treatment didn't kill your husband. The cancer did that, but it likely accelerated his decline by several months." "Several months that he could have been alive." "Yes." Lisa handed me another document. Richard Sterling made 3 payments to Harrison Medical Consulting in May 2007, $50,000 total. Dr. Harrison deposited the money and immediately transferred it to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the bank records, at the proof that Richard Sterling had paid the doctor who'd treated my husband, the doctor whose treatment had accelerated Robert's death. "We can't prove murder," Lisa said gently. "It's been too long. The statute of limitations has expired. Even if we could prove malpractice, even if we could prove Richard paid Harrison for something improper." "We can't touch him for Robert's death," I finished. "No." I sat there in silence, looking at my husband's medical records, thinking about those last terrible weeks, how Robert had been in so much pain, how the morphine had made him confused, paranoid, how he'd grabbed my hand one night and said, "Don't trust Sterling. Promise me, Sin. Don't trust him." I'd thought it was the drugs talking. "He knew," I said. "Robert knew something was wrong. He tried to warn me." Lisa put her hand over mine. "I'm so sorry." My phone rang. James's name on the screen. I'd been ignoring his calls all morning, but something in me broke. I answered. "Mom," his voice was rough, like he'd been crying. "Mom, please, we need to talk. Samantha said I have to tell you myself before you find out another way." My chest tightened. "Tell me what?" Silence. Then, "Can you meet me, please? Not at the house. Somewhere neutral." "Fine. My office. 1 hour." I hung up before he could respond. James arrived at Brennan Property Group at 3:47 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Our offices were in a renovated brownstone in Back Bay. Robert and I had bought the building in 2004, back when we were still small. Now it housed a staff of 47 people managing a portfolio of properties worth over $200 million. James looked terrible. Wrinkled suit from the wedding, red-rimmed eyes, hair disheveled. This wasn't the polished man who'd gotten married yesterday. This was someone who hadn't slept, someone who'd been crying, someone who had nowhere left to hide. I led him to my office and closed the door, sat behind my desk, Robert's old desk, and waited. "I lost my job," he said. No preamble, no easing into it. 7 months ago, in February, I was fired from Garrison Consulting for falsifying expense reports. There it was, confirmation of what Sarah had found. "Go on," I said, my voice ice. "I was too ashamed to tell you. Or Madison. So I pretended. I got up every morning, put on my suit, went to Starbucks for 8 hours. Came home, kept the lie going." "And the money?" I asked. "How have you been paying your bills?" His hands twisted in his lap. "I started borrowing. Credit cards, personal loans. I used your information as collateral without asking. I thought I'd get another job quickly, pay it back before you knew." "How much, James?" $89,000. In my name, but tied to your credit because I used your income on the applications." Not as much as he'd received from Sterling, I noted, but still enough to destroy someone financially if they couldn't pay it back. "And Richard Sterling?" I asked. "The $90,000 he paid you from March through July?" James's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I know everything, James. Every payment, every lie. So tell me the truth. What did he pay you for?" He looked at the floor. "He said it was consulting work, that Sterling Holdings needed someone who understood millennial consumer trends. He said he'd heard about me through business connections." "And you believed him?" "I needed to believe him, Mom. I just lost my job. I had debt piling up. Madison was talking about our future, about starting a family, about the kind of life she wanted. And here was this opportunity, $90,000 over 5 months, enough to get me back on my feet." "What did you give him in return?" "Market research, consumer reports, or at least that's what I thought." He finally looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "But 2 weeks ago I found emails between him and Madison, planning, strategizing." "Planning what?" "Our relationship, our engagement, the wedding, all of it." His voice broke. "There was an email from Richard to Madison dated March 10th. It said, 'The Brennan boy is our way in. Make him fall in love.' I felt like I'd been struck. Madison wrote back, 'He's easy. Mommy issues. I can work with this.' The cruelty of it. The calculated, methodical cruelty. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Because I was in too deep. Because I'd taken his money. Because I'd already lied to you about my job. Because—" He stopped, wiping his eyes. "Because I was ashamed. Of all of it." "Did you give Richard access to my business information?" "No, God, no, Mom. I swear. I never touched your company files. I never gave him anything about Brennan Property Group." "But he asked?" James nodded miserably. 2 weeks ago, he sent an email asking about your property portfolio in Roxbury. Said he was interested in development partnerships. Asked if I could get your development plans." "What did you say?" "I said I'd think about it. But, Mom, I was planning to tell you. After the wedding, I was going to tell you everything and call it all off." "But you didn't." "No." We sat in silence. Outside, Boston was going about its Sunday afternoon. Families walking in the common. Students studying at coffee shops. Life continuing normally while mine fell apart. "Your father lent Richard Sterling $500,000 in 2006, I said, to save his company from bankruptcy. Richard never paid it back. After your father died, he claimed it was a gift." James's face went white. "For 18 years, Richard Sterling has been living on money he stole from us. From you, from the legacy your father left you. And then he used you to try to steal even more." "Oh, God," James whispered. "And there's something else." I pulled out the medical reports. "Your father's doctor, Dr. Harrison. Richard Sterling paid him $50,000 right before your father died." I watched James read the documents, watched him understand what I was saying, what I was implying. "No," he said. "No, he couldn't have. I don't know for certain. The statute of limitations has expired, but your father's treatment accelerated his death, and Richard paid the doctor who administered that treatment." James stood up suddenly, knocking his chair backward. He walked to the window, his whole body shaking. "I married into a family that killed my father," he said, "and helped them do it." "You didn't know," I said, though the words felt hollow. "I should have known. I should have questioned why Richard Sterling was suddenly so interested in me, why Madison was so perfect, so accommodating, so quick to say yes. I should have. His voice broke. I'm so sorry, Mom, for all of it, for lying, for taking his money, for not defending you yesterday when she said, called me the help, I finished. I wanted to say something. I started to, but Richard grabbed my arm. He whispered, think about what you're risking. And he turned to face me. I chose her. I chose them. Even after everything they'd done, I chose them over you. I'm so sorry. I looked at my son, this 31-year-old man I'd raised alone, who I'd given everything to, who I'd failed to teach the most important lesson, that love doesn't mean absence of boundaries, that generosity doesn't mean unlimited access, that being a good mother doesn't mean saying yes to everything. I'd created this, not his dishonesty, that was his choice, but the conditions that made it possible, the entitled expectation that I would always catch him when he fell, the belief that consequences didn't apply to him because Mom would always fix it. Here's what happens now, I said. You move out of the apartment I pay for. You get a real job. You pay your own bills. No more money from me. Ever. Okay? You pay me back for the credit card debt. $2,000 a month. Every month. Miss a payment, I take legal action. I understand. And you end things with Madison. Today. Already done. He pulled out his phone and showed me. An email to his attorney sent at 11:23 a.m. that morning. I filed for annulment before I came here. Grounds, fraud, misrepresentation. She married me under false pretenses. I hadn't expected that. You filed? After I found those emails, after I saw what they did to you, his voice cracked. I couldn't stay married to someone who would do that. To you. To us. It was the first thing he'd done that felt like the son I'd raised. The son I'd hoped he could be. There's a meeting tomorrow morning, I said. 9 a.m. at Sterling Holdings. I'm confronting Richard with everything. I want you there. Why? Because you're going to tell the truth. About the payments, about the emails, about all of it. And James? Yes? This is your one chance at redemption. Don't waste it. Monday morning, September 18th, 2024. I arrived at Sterling Holdings at 8:47 a.m. Early enough to make a point, late enough that everyone would already be there, waiting. The building was a 4-story brownstone on Newbury Street, beautifully maintained on the outside. I knew from the acquisition documents that inside, it was struggling. Outdated systems, deferred maintenance, hemorrhaging cash. But the facade remained perfect, which was very much Richard Sterling's style. I wore my sharpest charcoal suit, Armani, purchased specifically for acquisitions. Lisa Thompson walked beside me carrying 2 briefcases full of documentation. Sarah Chen followed with a laptop and a portable printer. James brought up the rear, pale but resolute in a navy suit I'd never seen before. He must have bought it himself. The receptionist's eyes widened when she saw me. Mrs. Brennan, we weren't expecting— I own 51% of this company, I said calmly. I don't need an appointment. We took the elevator to the 4th floor, where the executive offices were located. Richard's assistant, a nervous young man named Timothy, jumped up from his desk. Mr. Sterling is in a call with— He'll take this meeting, Lisa said, walking past him and opening Richard's office door without knocking. Richard was indeed on a call. He took one look at us and said into his phone, I'll call you back. He hung up slowly, his face already resigned. Boardroom, Sarah said. 15 minutes. Full executive team. Cynthia, perhaps we should discuss this privately. Boardroom. 15 minutes. That's not a request, Richard. That's an order from your majority shareholder. At exactly 9 a.m., I walked into the Sterling Holdings boardroom. It was an ornate space, all mahogany and leather, with oil paintings of Sterling ancestors on the walls. Men in suits from various eras, all looking vaguely disapproving. I wondered if any of them had been thieves like Richard, or if he'd pioneered that particular family tradition. Richard sat at what used to be the head of the table. His nephew Derek flanked him on one side. Derek was 34, listed as CFO, though my investigation showed he'd never actually earned a finance degree. On Richard's other side sat his son Trevor, 31, the property manager who'd been billing the company for his college roommate's overpriced contracting services. 3 department heads filled the remaining seats, all looking uncomfortable. And near the door, almost hidden, sat David Washington. David was the actual CFO, a 55-year-old black man who'd been with Sterling Holdings for 15 years. He was one of the first people I'd researched when I started acquiring shares. Unlike Derek and Trevor, David had credentials: Wharton MBA, 20 years of experience, impeccable record. I'd wondered why Richard had him listed as Associate Financial Director, while his nephew got the CFO title. Now I knew. David was too competent, too honest, too dangerous. Emma Sterling slipped in last, sitting as far from her father as possible. "Close the door," I said to Lisa. She did, then handed folders to each person at the table. "Open them," I instructed. Inside were Sterling Holdings' real financial statements, not the ones they'd been showing investors. The real ones, compiled by Sarah over the past 2 weeks. I watched their faces change as they read. The department heads went pale. Derek shifted uncomfortably. Trevor stared at the numbers like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "This company," I began, my voice calm but absolute, "is 63 days from bankruptcy. The Cambridge properties are underwater by $2.4 million. The Providence Hotel hasn't turned a profit in 18 months and is hemorrhaging $73,000 per month. The Boston office building has vacancy rates of 47%, and you're still carrying it at 2019 valuation on your books." Richard started to speak. I held up one hand. "Derek," I continued, turning to the nephew, "your marketing position has produced 0 measurable results in 18 months. You've spent $347,000 on brand consulting with firms that don't appear to exist. Trevor, your property management involves contractors we don't need and can't afford. 3 of them are owned by your college roommate Philip Brenner, and all are overcharging by 30 to 40%. Derek's face flushed red. Trevor stared at the table. "Mr. Sterling," I said, my eyes on Richard, "you have been running this company into the ground while maintaining the appearance of success, and I'm going to tell you exactly how you did it." I nodded to Lisa. She distributed a second set of documents. "April 14th, 2006, I read. My husband, Robert Coleman, lent you $500,000 to save Sterling Holdings from bankruptcy. The loan agreement specified repayment over 5 years at 6% interest. Total amount owed with interest, $650,000. I slid a copy of the original loan agreement across the table. Robert's signature, Robert's trust, Robert's kindness being used against him. My husband died September 23, 2007, 1 year and 5 months after making this loan, before a single payment was made." I pulled out the next document. "March 2008, 6 months after Robert's death. Your attorney sent this letter to Robert's estate." I read it aloud, slowly, letting each word land. "Said amount was a personal gift between friends with no expectation of repayment. You stole from a widow and a 13-year-old child," I said. "For 18 years you've been living on my husband's money, building your life on his generosity, telling everyone about Sterling family honor while committing fraud in my dead husband's name." The room was completely silent. "But that's not all," I continued. I looked at the department heads, at David Washington. "For the past 2 years, Mr. Sterling has been systematically looting this company. He's moved $4.2 million into offshore accounts. He's falsified financial reports to investors. He's created shell companies to hide assets while deliberately bankrupting Sterling Holdings." I distributed more documents, bank records, transfer receipts, corporate filings for companies that existed only on paper. "His plan," I said, "was to let this company collapse and blame me, the new majority shareholder, while he escaped with millions." One of the department heads, a woman named Janet Ross, head of operations, spoke up. "How did he plan to blame you?" I looked at James. He stood up, his face ashen but his voice steady. "My name is James Coleman. I'm Mrs. Brennan's son, and for the past 7 months, Richard Sterling has been paying me $15,000 per month, $90,000 total." He pulled out his own documents, bank statements, email printouts, messages. "He told me it was consulting work, but it wasn't. It was payment for access to my mother, for information about her business, for," his voice cracked, "for marrying his daughter." He showed them the emails. Richard to Madison. "The Brennan boy is our way in." Madison's response, "He's easy. Mommy issues." Patricia Sterling, who'd been sitting frozen in the corner, made a small sound of distress. Richard planned to frame me for the theft, James continued, to make it look like I'd provided access codes to my mother's accounts, so that when the company collapsed, she'd be implicated. And if she tried to prosecute him, I'd go down too. But I never gave him access, James said, looking directly at his new father-in-law. I never betrayed my mother's company. You thought I would. You counted on it, but I didn't. Richard's face was gray. This is ridiculous. James, you can't possibly— I have the emails, Richard. All of them, including the one from 2 weeks ago where you asked me to steal my mother's Roxbury development plans. Your response, I added, pulling out that email, was telling. I can get the files, but I'm uncomfortable with the fraud angle. This is my mother. I looked at Richard. You wrote back, your mother has more money than she needs. We're not taking from her. We're redistributing. You'll inherit it anyway. Madison loves you. Don't you want to give her the life she deserves? Richard slumped in his chair. And there's one more thing, I said quietly. I pulled out the medical records. My husband's death. Dr. Thomas Harrison, the oncologist you recommended, the one whose experimental treatment accelerated my husband's decline. I showed them the bank records. You paid Dr. Harrison $50,000 in May 2007, the same month he started treating Robert. Dr. Harrison's license was later revoked for questionable patient outcomes. Patricia gasped. Emma covered her mouth with her hand. I can't prove you killed my husband, I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to control it. The statute of limitations has expired, but I know you did. Robert knew too. His last words to me were, "Don't trust Sterling." Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. So here's what happens next, I said. I stood up, placed both hands on the table. Derek, your position is eliminated effective immediately. Trevor, you're fired. Your contracts are terminated for cause, which means no severance. They started to protest. I cut them off. Richard, you have 2 choices. Resign with dignity by 5 p.m. today with standard severance, or I terminate you for cause tomorrow morning publicly, and you leave with nothing. You'll also repay the $500,000 my husband lent you, plus 18 years of compound interest. Total, $1,200,000. You have 90 days to begin payments. I don't have, Richard started. Sell your house. Sell your cars. Liquidate your offshore accounts. I don't care how you do it, but you'll pay what you owe. I turned to the department heads. Anyone who knew about the fraud and said nothing can leave now. Anyone who wants to help fix this company, stay. Janet Ross stayed. The other 2 department heads stood and walked out. David Washington raised his hand. Mrs. Brennan, I have something to add. I nodded. David opened his laptop and turned it around. I've been documenting irregularities for 3 years. Everything in here is backed up on servers Mr. Sterling doesn't know about. Offshore transfers, falsified reports, contract fraud, all of it. David, you're fired, Richard sputtered. You can't fire me, David said calmly. Mrs. Brennan owns this company, and I've already sent copies of everything to the FBI, the SEC, and the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. Richard's face went from gray to white. I should have come forward sooner, David said, looking at me. But I was afraid of losing my job, my pension, everything I'd worked for. Then I heard what happened at the wedding, what they called you. And I realized some things are more important than job security. Emma stood up then, her hands shaking. I have something too. She pulled out her phone, opened a voice recording app. This is from last night. Sunday dinner at our house. She pressed play. Richard's voice slurred with alcohol. She thinks she's won, but she can't prove anything. Not about the money. Not about Robert Coleman. That fool trusted me, and look where it got him. Patricia's voice crying. Richard, stop. Please just stop. Richard. Why? It's true. I paid Harrison to suggest that treatment. Did I know it would kill Robert? No. Did I hope it would accelerate things? Maybe. He was dying anyway. I just helped him along. The recording continued for another 30 seconds. Richard rambling about how he'd outsmarted everyone, how Cynthia was too soft to really hurt him, how he'd find a way out of this, like he'd found a way out of everything. The boardroom was completely silent when the recording ended. I'm so sorry, Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. I should have stopped him years ago. I've known since I was 12 that he stole from you. I heard my parents fighting about it, but I was too afraid to say anything, too afraid of destroying my own family." She looked at me. "But you didn't deserve any of this," and I couldn't stay silent anymore. Richard Sterling was arrested on September 19th, 2024, 23 hours after our boardroom meeting. The charges were extensive: wire fraud, securities fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, investor fraud, tax evasion. The FBI was also investigating the Robert Coleman situation, though Lisa warned me they probably couldn't make charges stick after 18 years. I didn't care about legal justice for Robert's death anymore. I had the truth. I had Richard's confession on Emma's recording. I knew what he'd done, and that was enough. Richard was denied bail after prosecutors argued he was a flight risk with offshore accounts. He sat in federal custody while his lawyers tried to negotiate a plea deal. Patricia Sterling filed for divorce on September 25th. She hired her own attorney and agreed to cooperate fully with authorities in exchange for immunity. She claimed, probably truthfully, that she hadn't known about the fraud, only about the unpaid loan to Robert. Madison called James exactly once after the meeting. He didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying she genuinely cared for him, but understood if he couldn't forgive her. The annulment was finalized on October 3rd, 6 months of marriage, erased like it never happened. James moved into a modest apartment in Somerville. 2 bedrooms, rent-controlled, nothing like the luxury Back Bay place I'd been paying for. He got a job as a property manager for a small firm in Cambridge. Not my company. He'd insisted on that. "I need to do this myself," he'd said. He paid me $2,000 on October 1st. On time, no excuses. And again on November 1st. And December 1st. We had dinner once a month at a modest Italian restaurant in the North End. The conversations were stilted at first, both of us navigating this new relationship where I wasn't his benefactor and he wasn't my entitled child. But slowly, something shifted. In November, he asked me about my day, really asked, like he cared about the answer. In December, he told me about a difficult conversation with a tenant and asked for advice. Not money, advice. In January, he said, "I'm proud of what you built, Mom. What you and Dad built. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." It was the first time he'd acknowledged my work without minimizing it, without assuming it had come easily or without sacrifice. Sterling Holdings was restructured under my oversight. David Washington became CEO with a salary commensurate with his actual skills. We brought in new management, fired the deadweight, renegotiated contracts with honest vendors. The Cambridge properties were sold at a loss, but we recovered enough to pay down debt. The Providence Hotel was renovated and repositioned as boutique lodging. Within 6 months, it was profitable. Emma Sterling came to work for Brennan Property Group in November. She started in an entry-level position despite her family name. "I want to earn my place," she'd said. "No favors, no shortcuts, just honest work." She was good at it, detail-oriented, conscientious, eager to learn. By March, I'd promoted her to assistant property manager. Not because she was a Sterling, because she'd earned it. Patricia Sterling and I had coffee once a month. Strange, I know, but we were both women who'd been married to Robert's generation. Both women who'd watched their husbands build empires and legacies. Both mothers who'd made mistakes with our children. "I should have left him years ago," she told me in January, over lattes at a cafe in Cambridge. After I found out about the loan he never repaid, I knew then what kind of man he was, but I was afraid of losing my lifestyle, of my children suffering, of being alone. "I understand," I said, and I did. She was working now, 3 days a week at a museum in Cambridge, giving tours and managing exhibits. She'd sold the Lewisburg Square house and bought a modest condo in Brookline. She seemed lighter somehow, freed from the performance of wealth. Madison, I heard through Emma, had taken a job at a nonprofit focused on affordable housing. She'd moved to a small apartment in Somerville, not far from James. They'd run into each other once at a grocery store. The encounter had been brief, awkward, sad. "She asked how you were," James told me. "I said you were good. She said," he paused, "she said she was sorry, that she'd been a different person back then, that her father had convinced her that was how the world worked." "Do you believe her?" I asked. "I don't know," James said. "Maybe, People can change. I'm trying to. Yes, I agreed. You are. It's March 20th, 2025 now. 6 months since that terrible, clarifying wedding. 6 months since I was called the help and decided to stop accepting other people's definitions of who I was. I'm sitting on my back patio in Beacon Hill, watching the morning sun turn the trees golden. I have a cup of coffee, Ethiopian blend from my parents' region, and Robert's photograph in a silver frame beside me. This is my Sunday morning ritual now. Coffee, memory, gratitude. Richard Sterling was sentenced 2 weeks ago. 12 years in federal prison. He'll be 70 when he gets out, if he gets out. His lawyers are appealing, but Lisa says it's unlikely to succeed. I feel nothing about it. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a quiet sense that justice has run its course. James is coming for lunch today. He called yesterday to ask if he could bring someone, a woman he's been seeing. Her name is Angela. She's a teacher. They met at a community center where James has started volunteering, teaching financial literacy to teenagers. I want to give back, he'd said when he told me about it, to try to make up for what I took. That's not how redemption works, I'd replied. You don't balance scales, you just become better than you were. Emma is coming too. She's bringing homemade bread from a recipe her grandmother used to make. Patricia taught it to her last month, passing down the one good thing from the Sterling legacy. My business is thriving. Brennan Property Group and Sterling Holdings are now operating as partners, focusing on affordable housing development in Roxbury and Dorchester, the neighborhoods where I grew up, where families like mine struggled to find decent, safe places to live. We're building something Robert would have been proud of, something that honors his memory better than any revenge ever could. I think about Madison's words often. The help we had to invite. At the time, they were meant to humiliate me, to put me in my place, to remind me that no matter how much money I spent, I would never really belong in their world. But she was wrong about where I belonged. I didn't need to belong in their world. I'd built my own world, one where respect was earned through character, not inheritance, where dignity wasn't negotiable, where family meant honesty, not blind loyalty. I'm 63 years old. I've been a widow for 18 years. I've been a mother for 31 years, though I'm only now learning how to do it right. I've been a business owner for 18 years and a CEO for the last 6 months of my own fully realized life. And I've learned this. You don't need to be liked by everyone. You don't need to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You don't need to accept cruelty from people who should honor you. What you need is boundaries. Clear, firm, loving boundaries. I spent 18 years confusing enabling with love, thinking that giving James everything meant I was being a good mother, that never saying no meant I was generous and kind. But real love sometimes means watching people struggle. Real love means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Real love means saying, I believe you can do better, instead of I'll fix it for you. Real love means teaching people that actions have consequences, that respect is earned, that dignity is not negotiable. The greatest victory wasn't seeing Richard Sterling in handcuffs. It wasn't getting my money back or saving the company or even learning the truth about Robert's death. The greatest victory was reclaiming myself. Remembering who I was before grief and guilt turned me into someone who apologized for taking up space. I hear James's car pull up outside. Through the window, I see him helping a young woman out of the passenger seat. Angela, I presume. She's pretty, with kind eyes and an easy smile. She's carrying flowers. Emma's car pulls up right behind them. She waves at James and Angela, then grabs a basket from her back seat. I stand up, smooth down my casual Saturday clothes, jeans and a soft sweater, nothing fancy. No performing today, just being. I open the door before they knock. Mom, James says, and there's warmth in his voice I haven't heard in years. This is Angela. Angela, this is my mother, Cynthia Brennan. Mrs. Brennan, Angela says, extending her hand. James has told me so much about you. It's an honor to meet you. An honor. Not a formality, not an obligation. An honor. Call me Cynthia, I say, taking her hand. And welcome to my home. Emma comes up the walk behind them, basket in hand. I made the bread. Well, I made it with Mom's help. Patricia's help, she corrects, still navigating that complicated relationship. But it turned out pretty good, I think. We all go inside. I put on tea. James and Angela sit at the kitchen table, easy with each other, laughing at some private joke. Emma slices the bread and finds butter in my refrigerator without asking, comfortable in my space, like family. And I realize this is what I was supposed to have all along. Not perfection, not performances, just honest connection with people who choose to be here, who value what I bring to their lives, who see me as whole and complex and worthy. Robert's photograph watches us from the mantel. I catch his eye and smile. "We did okay," I whisper. "It took a while, but we got there." The bread is warm and perfect. The conversation flows easily. Angela asks me about my work, genuinely curious. Emma tells a funny story about a difficult tenant. James listens more than he talks, learning the art of paying attention. And I sit at the head of my table in my home that I own, surrounded by people who chose to be here, eating bread made with love instead of obligation. This is dignity. This is peace. This is victory. Not in the destruction of enemies, not in revenge or retribution, but in the quiet reclamation of self, in the firm establishment of boundaries, in the choice to build something beautiful from the ruins of what was taken. I'm 63 years old. I'm a widow. I'm a mother. I'm a CEO. I'm a Black woman who came from Ethiopia and built an empire in Boston. And I will never again let anyone make me feel like I need permission to take up space. That's the lesson I learned at the price of $150,000 and 18 years of mistakes. It was worth every penny.